Hi, I'm Sarah Sedwick, and welcome to my studio. This is my online mentorship group session for May 2018. Thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about how to use thumbnail sketches, what they are, how to use them to plan our composition, and how to go about making some. So I posted on our group Facebook page some pictures of my still life setup and the kind of rough outlines of 3 different thumbnail sketches, 3 different compositions that I've come up with based on the same exact still life. So I set up one still life, and with myself in the same position relative to it and the same light source, I did 3 different thumbnail sketch compositions. And I made a poll to see whether most people would like number 1, number 2, or number 3. And so I will show those 3 images, and I'll put them on the video as well. But number 1 was the square composition. 2 was the vertical rectangle. Am I right? Yeah, I think I am. And 3 is the horizontal rectangle. And I've done these thumbnail sketches 5 by 5 inches roughly. This is 5 by 6.5 inches, which is the rough equivalent of a 9 by 12 canvas. So either I paint this on a square or I do it on a 9 by 12, and that's either a vertical or a horizontal. So the point of this is to kind of illustrate that we set up a still life, and the still life is clicking for us. It's working. We don't have too many elements. We don't have too few. The color scheme of the still life is working. You know, we're liking the color combinations that we've got set up, and we're visually enjoying it. But the thing is, 2 artists can come in and be standing in the same position relative to that beautiful still life we've created and create radically different paintings depending on the choice of format, right? Square canvas or rectangular. And also just depending on how they choose to position the objects presented within that format. So even if 2 different artists were making 2 square paintings, same format, the way they choose to arrange those objects within the picture plane can create really different paintings. So without changing my head position, without changing the light source at all, without rearranging any of the objects, I've got 3 different paintings here, and I want to show what that kind of looks like. So I did use the viewfinder, and I have some pictures through the viewfinder that I can post later on. But pretty much what I'm going to do now is come in and show a value plan for each of these thumbnail sketches, and I'm going to be using Sharpie and gray pen. This is a Pitt pen by Faber-Castell, and it's a black Sharpie by Sharpie. Go figure. So what do I want to do first? I want to, like we just spent some time discussing, go in and look for the big, dark masses. I have some rough outlines here, but what I want to start to do is squint and look for my darkest darks. Now, certainly around the rim of this glass and into its cast shadow, I have some darks and some interesting darks here. And one reason I like to use Sharpie, and I often will use ballpoint pen for these studies instead of a pencil for the initial block in. Can't erase it. I didn't want to use ballpoint pen for this though, because you can't use ballpoint pen on a vertical surface. Ballpoint pen only works lying down on the ground. So working from the general to the specific. Big, big value shapes. Come on, Sharpie, don't fail me now. I have like an enormous one downstairs. I guess I could go get that one. It's for marking moving boxes. The size of my thumb. Maybe I'll have to. Okay. A lot of squinting involved in this part of the process. And yeah, so here's the form shadow of the apple, and here's the cast shadow of the apple. If I look at this as one big dark shape and put it in as one big dark shape, I can come in after that and separate them out with something even darker. If I was painting, I would do it like that. Do you see that? That's painting the form shadow and the cast shadow together and then coming in and separating them. General to the specific. All right, darkest darks. And for the sake of clarity, I'm going to show my outline of the square. There we go. And now we'll start to get a visual on those negative shapes. So those are my darks. Where are my midtones? So I need to ask myself, in order to arrive at what my midtones are, I need to ask myself, where are my whites? You know, this is all going to be midtone because it is not white. Maybe the highlights on the apple will be white. But in general, the whole apple, even the light side of this Granny Smith apple, is darker. And the whole pink cloth is darker. The lightest lights in this painting are going to be that white ground and the highlights. So I really get to pay attention to the hierarchy of lights here. Awesome. So it ends up being more than 3 values. It's probably a little more like 4 values, but you get the general idea of where your lights are, what your negative shapes start to feel like. You know, we have basically a large light shape in the negative space here, a medium-sized light shape in the negative space, and then a small one, and then a teeny one up in the corner. And maybe I would even think about massing my darks a little bit more in through here. Interesting. Okay, moving on to the next one. I think I need to go and get my other Sharpie. I don't want to. I'm going to press on. Okay. Let's do the third one. Let's do the horizontal one next. And let's say in this one, I want to get even more general. So that certainly this apple in the front, yeah, it's got a highlight. But let's say this whole shape. And these are kind of big for thumbnail sketches. Now this could be something, even if you were working on paper, this could be something that you did with paint. It's a big dark shape. Maybe that's the cast shadow. The form shadow. And so on this one up here, I chose to make this dark go all the way around the apple up here. And this one, I'm just going to call it this half. This is the apple coming in from the bottom, but it's just a lurking dark shape, really. In the final piece, I don't think I would end up making too much out of that apple. It would be pretty implied. Maybe in this one, I choose to, so I did have the white background paper coming off and showing the corner of that darker background paper that was there. And then maybe in this one, I would choose to have this pink cloth lighten up as it comes forward. Or not. Now, how to deal with this when it comes to color. These are the sort of decisions that I'm making here in my value plan. When I get into that pink cloth later on, I'm going to be so consumed with the color mixing aspect. I may forget that I had really wanted to show that it was getting more light as it came into the foreground. Think up here, maybe it's darker back here, and then as it comes up into the foreground, it gets lighter. These are the kind of problems that are much, much easier to think about and work through in a thumbnail sketch. All we're doing right now is moving from a design of the painting that's line-based to a design of the painting that's based on big value shapes. But maybe I don't like this in this painting. Maybe I feel like, so right now I've got these light shapes in the negative space. I've got a big one, a medium-sized one, and a small one. And you can also tweak things. I could say, well, I don't really like this. This feels like too much small detail at the top. To have this coming so close up to the top like that. Maybe I want to experiment with letting this go off the top, letting it go out of the picture up there. We like that better? Do we not? Maybe this wants to be dark all the way down to the corner. And maybe we want to keep this darker up here, even darker. So it goes from 2 or 3 values and can get more and more specific. But remember, we're not practicing our drawing right now necessarily. You know, we know how to draw this. We don't need to go and worry about all the little aspects of the drawing. It's not that helpful in this. Although what might be helpful would be to remember that I do have these white lines here, which is a big part of what's going on in this painting. So I can come in with my white pit pen and put those back in. There are a lot of different ways to do thumbnail sketches. Just pencil works great. Oil paint in a sketchbook. Sharpie and white marker on toned paper. Just ballpoint pen. There are a lot of different ways to do this. It'd be really fun to experiment. Interesting. Okay. And number 2 got the most votes in the poll for composition. So in case you can't really see it real well, this is the composition roughly of 2. It's pretty interesting. I don't go for the vertical rectangle very often. I tend to be mostly square and then horizontal rectangle chooser. But when I do this process, where I do the 3 different ones, I often end up choosing the vertical rectangle. And I think there's a lesson in there for me somewhere. That I like it, that it's a better option than I think it is most of the time. And I don't really know until I do the footwork, do this process. Thumbnail sketches are so critical because planning and composition, it's really hard to visualize what things are going to look like on the canvas. Even looking through your viewfinder, it can be really hard to visualize. And just a line drawing is not nearly as the same kind of indication as a value plan, because it doesn't help us see the negative shapes as well. We can see lines are helpful. They have a certain amount of information, but really it's the layout of the big value shapes that has more effect on us visually as far as impact than line work. So this is what the line work looks like for 2, and then come in and start on the values. That apple is really generally a much more overall big dark shape. I'm interested in the big shapes here, not little details.
Are you dying from the fumes there?
No, I'm dying from the fact that it's not dark enough.
It's pretty good from here.
Not enough fumes. More fumes. Good, I'm glad it's working visually. No, it's not smelly. And so I don't really even need the third value to make this distinction. If I have a pencil, the tendency is to start rendering. I know that tendency to start rendering. I definitely get that. And so it can be hard to limit yourself to just dark, medium, and light when you're working with pencil, but always something good to practice. And again, in this one, I want to go in because I can do different gradations with the Sharpie. I keep wanting to go in and make distinctions within the big dark areas. And my goal is not to do that because I want to see the major shapes. And so at this point that I've got this one at, I pretty much have a notan. Let's do the midtones. I do see this napkin as it comes back between these as being the same value as the top of the apple. Lots of squinting. And I feel like there's more light in the foreground. So I could even say, well, I will knock these lights back a bit. As well. Interesting. It can come into like a 4 value drawing by hatching back over it. It can get more and more specific. But at what point do we have enough to help us make the decision about composition? it becomes a lot easier to see what the focal point is when the values are filled in. Because remember, we've discussed previously that focal point is not about subject matter. It's not about the noun that you're painting. It's not about the thing that the painting is about. The focal point becomes an effect of contrast. So even though I might want this painting to be about this apple, if I put the strongest contrast in the painting, here, between some of the highlights that are happening around the base of this glass or in the reflection and the reflected shadow, which they are, it's also the smallest detail, the smallest areas of detail. That's going to become the focal point, no matter how much I want this to be the focal point, no matter whether I put it in a sweet spot or not. If I have the smallest details and the highest value contrast in another area, that will become the focal point, the main eye magnet. So, if you do this process and you still are really feeling like you want to do the horizontal rectangle, even though this one turns out to be the loser, you can tweak it. There are things I could do to this. I could use the information from these two, what I like about what's happening here, to make a change in the still life that would make a horizontal rectangle work if I absolutely had to do a horizontal rectangle. Like I might say, I really like the big flowing mass of shadow descending through the painting in this one. How can I create more of that over here? Well, I could move this apple up and behind, from over here to up and behind this, to kind of create more of a mass of darks moving down through the painting this way. So I could, at this point, move the still life around to make changes. So because I have floated these on the page, I didn't take a square sketchbook and draw this all the way out to the edges of each page. Because I've floated these in the middle of a page, I have the option of saying, oh, and just doing one drawing this in a square and then saying, well, let's see what it looks like as a rectangle, and just stretching it out, doing the rest of the drawing and kind of changing the crop and looking at it that way, or just continuing to draw it down from there.
Yeah,
It's only having one drawing that goes out in two directions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like being able to see all three of them separately like this. Mm-hmm. But there are, like I said, lots of different ways to do thumbnails, and experimenting with some different techniques and also different materials to get to the ones that are easiest for you to use. And so then we've discussed why this is important. Like, I hope I've at least made that point, why this is really helpful, because we've done sessions in the past on how to set up a good still life. We've talked about it isn't always about adding more things. Often it's about taking things out. When you're stumped, think about, what can I take out? If it's not helping, it's hurting, take it out. If you're stumped, think about changing your perspective on the still life. Move yourself around the room. The problem may not be in the still life. It might be in your point of view on it. Think about changing the lighting. The still life might be working together, color-wise, object-wise, rhythmically. You might like your position relative to it. You could think about changing the direction of the light source. Raise the light, lower the light, try it from the other direction, because cast shadows make a big impact. As we see, cast shadows have a huge impact on the value structure of the composition. But once we've set up a still life that we like, we need to decide how that still life is going to become a painting, what kind of composition it's going to be, and what the design of our canvas is going to be. And this is how we make decisions based on that. Looking through the viewfinder is very, very good, but it's often not quite the same. And it's by practicing this process that we get better at making decisions using the viewfinder. Mm-hmm. I've talked before about all my steps of the process, from thumbnail sketch to a 4-value study, even sometimes with a notan, just a black and white study before I do the 4-value study. Do I do every single one of those steps every single time I do a painting? No. Because with practice, some of those steps become internalized. So now I can just think to myself, what's the overall no-tan pattern of this? Or I put the darks in first as I'm doing my thumbnail sketch. I'll put just the darks in, leave it at a stage where I only have black and white, and just look at it for a minute, and then move on and fill in the other values. That's also helpful. So once we've got a good still life, we then kind of hit the wall of composition. Like we come up against it. It's like, how does this get from the table to my canvas? This is the road that it travels from the table to the canvas. This is how we decide what our painting will ultimately look like. And so once you've done this and you've picked the composition that you like, it's just a matter of transferring it to your canvas. The good news is, since we've already practiced drawing this 3 times, it should be relatively easy to block it in. And I go right from this to my underpainting. Wet tone on the canvas, underpainting, 3-step painting process. I've got other video demos of that. I don't use a grid, although you could draw a grid over this, just a simple, even a simple rule of thirds grid, divided in thirds vertically, divided in thirds horizontally. Do the same thing to your canvas, and then use that to help yourself place the objects and repeat the layout, move this layout from here to your canvas. But we've already done these thumbnail sketches in a format where we know it's going to transfer equally to the canvas. That's important, because if you're working in a rectangle, a square is easy. You do a square thumbnail sketch, you know it's going to transfer to a square canvas, the format will be the same. But if you do a sketch and you block in a rectangle, the dimensions of that rectangle may not be the same, depending on whether your canvas is an 8x10, a 9x12, an 11x14, 12x16. These are slightly different rectangles. So keep that in mind when you're doing your thumbnail sketch and measuring it out. I think I mentioned these are 5x6.5 inch rectangles, which roughly should translate to a 9x12 canvas. So yeah, thumbnail sketches and what they might be used for, how we can use them. I think they're really important, no matter what kind of thumbnail sketch you do, even if it's just pencil or ballpoint pen in a sketchbook, all the way up to oil sketches, some kind of preparatory study that's small and quick and lets you review several options for a composition. And I like the challenge of doing it from the exact same still life. How many different iterations can I get from the exact same simple setup? I think it's a fun challenge. So who's got questions?
So what's next when you paint this? Oh, I have another question. Could you just tell me, what is the reason for massing the large shapes?
Because it makes a clearer statement to your viewer. You know, it helps you frame your focal point. What we want to do in our painting is not render every single thing so much. When you look out at the world, you can't focus everywhere at once. You can only focus in on one spot at a time. And so if your painting is everywhere so detailed and everywhere so rendered, it becomes kind of hard for your viewer to take it all in. So we do want calmer, quieter passages to offset details and centers of interest. And big masses do that. They also give us opportunities for lost edges and those other kinds of cool visual puzzles that we like to have to figure out. But really, the reason is it makes a clear statement. We've talked before about the whole point of composition being to make your painting so bold and visually comprehensible that someone's going to walk into a gallery, see your painting from 30 feet away, and want to go over to it and look at it. You know, you got to get them in there. Once you've got them in there, you have lots of opportunities with detail, color, brushwork to keep them there looking at your painting. But what's going to attract your viewer from all the way across the room is, you know, the big, bold shape of dark against light. You know, you can see some of my paintings back there from a distance. Which ones are the most visually effective? It's probably the ones with the most simple dark and light value structure that will attract your eye first, because you can understand what's going on from a far distance. Maybe this guy is not as successful as this guy because it's more contrasty and bold with the big value shapes, maybe. And looking at famous paintings, looking at master artists' paintings is great for this, because the more you look while you're running this program in the back of your mind about the massing of the big value shapes, you start to notice it, that they all do it.
Yeah.
You'll see some, like the dark hair of a portrait going into a section of dark wall behind, or a white shirt in a portrait going into a section of white wall behind. And you start to notice, yeah, this artist was not painting a white shirt and a background. They were painting a large light shape in the painting that would then be a supporting character for the face where the most detail was.
Okay. That makes sense.
And that's what I want here. You know, I want big areas of value that are going to be of different sizes and weights to create visual interest, right? No two intervals the same, but I want big, calm shapes, interesting shapes, but they're going to support my more busy, detailed focal point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. I really would be so happy to follow up with any additional questions on the Facebook page, because I remember being introduced to the concept of the thumbnail sketch and thinking, okay, this is all right. I'm not sure I get this. And I used to think of it as, I'm just practicing drawing. I'm practicing drawing this painting subject. And it's good for that as far as it goes, but I didn't really understand that what I was doing was not practicing drawing my subjects. It was deciding on a layout for my canvas. I mean, I understood that in my mind, but I didn't really get how to use it. So if you're feeling a little mystified by why I'm placing so much importance on thumbnail sketches, don't worry. It'll happen. Sooner or later, the other shoe will drop. It took me years. In the meantime, I think it's enough that you just take my word for it, that this is a good thing to practice, and practice it. And one more thing, they don't have to be this large. They don't have to be 5-6 inches long. They call them thumbnail sketches because, at least the way it was introduced to me, it can be the size of your thumbnail. This is too small, but 2 inches, fine. We're just looking for the big shapes and the layout. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and it's been a fantastic month, May 2018, on the books. I'm looking forward to what you guys are going to do this summer. So thanks for being here today. Thanks a lot.